So welcome to today's webinar. I think this topic of business leaders on a mission for racial equity, it could not be more timely. We really do these events because we know the vital importance of shining a light on sustainability leaders and allowing UNH students and the broader community to connect with powerful role models and companies who are really advancing sustainability in their own organizations and beyond. This timely panel is going to explore how certified B Corps and other pioneering businesses are building an inclusive economic system that addresses fundamental injustice and inequity. And I'm really delighted to introduce you to today's moderator and speakers. So moderating today's event is our friend and partner at B-Lab, Anthea Kelsick. She is the co-CEO of B-Lab USA in Canada. And joining her on the panel today is Geeta Iyer, President of Boston Common Asset Management. Katie Bouton, who I would be remiss in saying if I didn't say she is a proud alum of UNH, class of 1996. She is the founder and CEO of Koya Leadership Partners and also President of Diversify Search. And last but no means least, Panel Cesar, who is the co-founder and CEO of Black & Bold Specialty Beverages. Thank you to all of you for being on this panel today, and we can't wait to hear what you're going to share with us. So I'm going to hand over now to you, Anthea.
Thank you, Fiona. And Katie, Geeta, and Pernell, you're welcome to turn your cameras off for a few minutes if you'd like a little break, and I can call you back when we get back together. So thank you, Fiona, and thank you to everyone who is joining in and listening. Almost 400 strong, if I can see that in the participant count. Always a pleasure to be at UNH. I've had multiple invitations, and unfortunately COVID has prevented me from coming in person, but I'm glad to be joining you in this virtual setting. And some gratitude for the excellence that the school shares in sustainability and being a real model for education, particularly in sustainability in this country and beyond. So by way of introduction, I could share a little bit more about B-Lab and B Corps for those who may not be familiar. I have the privilege of being co-CEO of B-Lab US and Canada, which is one of 6 organizations for our now global network. We pretty much cover the globe. And we've been working since 2006 to transform the global economic system to benefit all people, all communities, and the planet. We are best known for our B Corp certification, and that certification accredits private sector for-profit companies that meet the most rigorous standards of overall social and environmental performance. And today, there are over 3,500 B Corps around the world in 70 countries and 150 industries. And they join a group of about 10,000 companies around the world that also use the B Impact Assessment and a newish tool called the SDG Action Manager that actually allows the private sector to measure their impact against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. While we're best known for the B Corp certification, we also recognize that changing the behavior of companies is just one piece of the puzzle of economic systems change. And so globally, our network and our organizations also invest quite heavily in partnering with others in our ecosystem to shift culture and redefine what success means for business. And we also invest a fair bit of time enacting structural change to help the context in which businesses operate so that they can be successful. Today, though, we're going to be talking about what it means for business leaders to be accountable to equity and justice. And the fact of the matter is, while we sit in the midst of multiple crises in our country and certainly beyond our borders, there is also an incredible opportunity at our doorstep. We're sitting in the midst of a social movement around racial justice that is impacting every sector of our society. And I recently read, probably just a month ago in the New York Times, that the Black Lives Matter movement is poised to be the largest movement ever in the United States. About 15 to 26 million people have joined protests and demonstrations over the murder of George Floyd and others since. And these figures are unprecedented. And so with the backdrop of COVID-19 and this social unrest around racial injustice, we're also starting to see the important role that business and the private sector needs to play in supporting the building of racial equity, and also an acceleration in the role that business must take. I'm sure many of you have seen in the press immediate and somewhat reactionary steps around what businesses can do, from making an anti-racist statement to making million-dollar donations to investing in diversity and inclusion. But what's important to note is that these are just first steps. And what we have to be clear about is that these will not be sufficient to address systemic racism. We can't presume that to dismantle a system that's been centuries in the making, that a few first steps in the moment are going to do the trick. What's required is a long-term and a systematic approach. And we have to look to companies to invest beyond this moment and take a hard look at the fundamental principles by which they operate. There's several ways that we recommend they do this. And Kathy, do you mind bringing up the visual for us to talk through? At B Lab, we talk a lot to our companies in the B Corp community, and in fact, companies beyond our B Corp community, about how they can start going down the path. This is by no means a comprehensive or exhaustive list, as the journey to building racial equity will take time, and the real steps will reveal themselves as we go. But consider this a really good place to start. And so the first thing we want every company to be able to do is look within themselves. All of this work towards racial equity or becoming anti-racist, all of this work starts at home. So for any corporate leader committed to building racial equity, they must look at their culture. Are you building and nurturing a culture of anti-racism? And that means holding yourself and others in your organization accountable for seeing, naming, and then dismantling inequitable ideas and practices that may exist. And a good litmus test of this is, can you comfortably talk about race in your company? And if not, what measures are you taking to do so? As you look within, there's also an examination of the policies that both create and sometimes perpetuate systemic inequities. This includes worker policies, supplier relationships, and particularly at the intersection of wages, benefits, and access to capital. And so as you look within your company, ask yourself, are you setting specific hiring targets to promote a diverse workforce? How inclusive are those hiring practices? And do you potentially discriminate against certain populations because of background or because of education? How diverse is your leadership team or your board? And are you paying a living wage and extending that to every employee? The goal is to be specific and to be very targeted in your approach, and to create measures that you can look at a certain time frame and know if you've been successful or not. The second thing to look at is at your community. Structural and institutional racism is deeply embedded in the way cities, neighborhoods, and communities are organized, forcing many people of color into segregated communities that are often isolated from important infrastructure. Business and the private sector has a really influential and critical voice with local government and community organizations to improve these outcomes for communities of color. And so as you look at your company and what it can do within its community that it impacts, how often are you advocating for local policy change that improves the outcome for your employees, your customers, and communities of color that you directly impact? How are you mitigating the environmental impact of your operations? When you think about your corporate philanthropy, how much of that is directed at actively addressing root causes of racial inequity and going beyond providing charity for communities of color? And how might you think about investing directly in the Black, Indigenous, or people of color owned businesses in your communities that surround you? The third thing to think about is how your company acts within the context of society. Structural racism is baked into our public policies, into our government institutions, into our culture, and all of those things perpetuate inequities for many. Again, a company's voice here is incredibly influential and can certainly extend that influence beyond its own customer and worker base. And so the key question we always like to ask is, think about, what is the civic duty of your company? Just as citizens, we are all expected to vote. What is the equivalent of that for a company? How is your company stepping up as a conscious member of society and using its influence to advocate for policy change? How are you using resources to combat racialized inequities? And how are you using the power of your voice to the public to serve as an ally or educate your consumers or inspire action? And in particular, how are you centering the voices of people of color in those conversations? These are just 3 ways to start. And again, by no means the full roadmap, which will again ultimately unfold as the journey is ongoing. But the most important thing to note right now is that any action a company takes must be part of a long-term plan. The multiple crises we're facing at the moment have created a massive opportunity for change. Let's not waste that opportunity by creating more Band-Aids. Let's grab a hold to drive the systemic change that the world needs. Kathy, you can take the slide down for me, please. And I would invite Geeta and Katie and Pernell to turn on their cameras. And now let's turn to hearing from them for those who are living and breathing this every day as business leaders in a variety of sectors. And I'd love to start by turning it over to each of them for a brief introduction of themselves and their companies and what really helps them stand out in the context of being accountable business leaders. And so with that, I'd love to turn over to Katie to kick us off, and then maybe we can go to Geeta and then Pernell.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Bouton. I'm CEO of Koya Leadership Partners. We're an executive search firm placing talent around the country in nonprofits, higher ed, and socially responsible businesses. And I think what's distinguished us from the beginning is that DEI and an emphasis on placing leaders of colors in leadership positions has really been at the forefront of our work since the beginning. Glad to be here. Oh, and I'm a UNH grad.
Geeta.
I'm Geeta Iyer, founder and president of Boston Common Asset Management, a sustainable investment firm committed to environmental as well as social and governance leadership. We are a women-led, majority employee-owned, a very diverse firm. But most importantly, we are B-Lab certified, and as a B Corp, we've been ranked best for the world 3 years in a row. Most proud of that. So we use our investments and our voice as shareholders to make a difference to the world. Look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. And Pernell. There you go.
All right, sorry, had some technical issues there. Hello, everyone. Pernell Cesar, co-founder, CEO of Black & Bold Specialty Beverages. We are a specialty coffee roastery, as well as a wholesaler of loose leaf tea based out of Des Moines, Iowa. A little bit over 2 years old. We're, I believe, a little bit over 2 months old as a certified B Corp. Always have been a fan of B Corps and I guess a self-titled conscious consumer. And so with you know, the idea of building Black & Bold, we always had an aspiration to be a part of the B Corp community, to help embody and represent what, you know, sustainability looks like, but in our own way. So for Black & Bold, our entire ethos is supporting the pipeline of disadvantaged domestic youth, while making sure we uphold the integrity of what I believe is, if not in your mind, should be normalized support on supply chain sustainability, as well as environmental sustainability. And so from our lens, myself and my co-founder, both childhood best friends from Gary, Indiana, the key prong that was missing from our vantage point, that's the ethos that we look to embody on behalf of Black & Bold.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Pernell. And so let's dig into this conversation where we're going to talk a little bit about how each of these business leaders and their companies is advancing racial equity. And we're going to structure it a little bit in the way that we talked about how companies connect. And so it's looking within your company, looking beyond just the internal stakeholders of your company to your community, and then looking even further beyond that to society. We'll start first with looking within and hearing from Katie and Geeta about what it is that they do from an internal standpoint to help drive this transformation. And so Geeta, maybe we can start with you first.
Sure. So we have long engaged our portfolio companies on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and believing that we should walk our talk and build our firm in the same way that we engage what we expect from companies that we would want to invest in, and also convinced that diverse thinking indeed makes for better financial outcomes and better overall impactful investing. We set out to build a firm where we not only built diversity in terms of membership within the firm, but also within the owners team, and have leaned particularly to build a diverse investment team. I find that in a lot of financial firms, women and people of color are sidelined in staff positions, often in HR or compliance. And I was very clear that we wanted to build a firm where, in fact, we get the benefit of that diverse thought at the center of the plate, at the center of our effort. And so our team, our investment team, I'm most proud to say, is 2/3 or nearly 70% either women or people of color. People of color are a third, and women are a substantial number when you put the two together. So that was one. The second is that we, would you like me to speak also to steps we took since in the last several weeks, or would you like
Absolutely.
just the
yes, we'd love to hear what you're doing.
So speaking again still about how we built the firm and what we did, we always felt we were pretty good, but clearly the events of the last few weeks have brought home to us the last few months, and indeed the building awareness and holding a mirror to ourselves, we realized we had much more to do and lean forward into this. We've always had a kind of employee volunteering with organizations of a diverse causes, as well as serving underserved populations in our city. We've always been charitably inclined. Those to me are like easy things that we can do any year, and we did more of it this year, particularly in the wake of COVID, which has just exacerbated everything so dramatically. But most importantly, we have had a continuing education program all throughout. Like we screen films over lunch on a Friday, maybe it's 13th, maybe it's a different TED Talk, and we have a discussion. So to the question you raised about how do you talk about such things, so some of these we had been doing, but we had to sort of make a stair-step jump up. So we very intentionally updated our DEI and anti-racism vision, as well as put concrete steps beneath it. So specifically, we think of diversity, equity, and inclusion as separate but interrelated and mutually reinforcing topics, and that brushing it all together doesn't do it for us. Second, we called out anti-racism as a journey that we need to undertake. And so firm level steps and commitments, every department level of steps and commitments in policy, which means investments, ESGs, research and engagement, admin, marketing, etc. And ultimately, at each person's own personal commitment. So happy to talk more. I just wanted to frame it to say that there was continuing learning, there's continuing practice, and then actual milestones that managerial responsibility has been given to heads of each of the areas, so that it actually translates into not just lofty talk, but actual measurable outcomes.
Absolutely. And thank you. I find power in the sort of baking into your DNA what it means to have diversity, equity, inclusion. These are not the siloed departments. It is fully part of who you are and your ethos. And I think there's an important message in what you say, that even for those who may be further along in this journey, there's always room to continue down the path, and in the wake of recent events, that even accelerating in your organization. Yeah. Thank you. Katie, can we hear about what's happening inside of your company?
Sure. I think it has really evolved over time. Our strategy around this work looks different 16 years ago than it does now. One, because the company's in a different place, but also the world is in a different place, and sort of where we are on our journey, which is the word we use internally, has shifted. So I think a few things, though, have remained very constant. The first is that we consider our diversity, equity, and inclusion work at the center of our business strategy. It's not something that sits over here and then we can say we did it. It's really bleeds, like Geeta said, into everything we do. So, how we select vendors and what the process is for that. What do our job descriptions look like? How do we evaluate employees? How do we decide what clients to take and what clients not to take? And what does that look like? So I think really just knowing from the get-go that this was a business strategy for us and at the core of what we do has really helped make sure that DEI is alongside all the other priorities around revenue and the more classic things that you might think of in a business. I think the second thing is that we've really tied our strategy and our desired outcomes to actually tracking and being accountable for those. So sometimes it's something as little or seemingly small as DEI is not a topic that comes up only when something happens. It's on every single agenda. So every cohort meeting, every management meeting, it is a standing topic that we talk about and make sure that we don't let things slide. It's part of our balanced scorecard for the metrics for our company. So when I give a talk about, revenue and how are we doing to budget and all that, at the same time, I'm talking about where are we in terms of our strategy, and that conversation is happening quarterly. It is just as important as the top line revenue number in terms of the metrics we're tracking, and people understand that our goals around that are part of their performance, their responsibilities as managers and as employees and as kind of a member of the community. And then the last thing that I was thinking about a lot and how it's evolved is that there has to be a baseline level of trust and vulnerability and humbleness in all the work that you're doing. You can have all the metrics in the world, all the strategy, but what we have found at a baseline is that this is super often painful, complicated work. And if you're going to build a community and a company that's really wrestling with this and trying to work and create a new world, you're going to get messy. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to be humbled every day. And I think working really hard, very tangibly, we created a courageous conversations group where people joined to talk about these issues. More recently, as we've gotten bigger, we have affinity groups. And it's in those smaller settings and in all the leaders leading that we find out, we lead by being humble and understanding that this is messy and building that trust in like micro moments and then also macro.
Thanks, Katie. And interesting to hear you reinforcing DEI as not a checklist, but a fundamental part of your strategy. And I think that is a mindset shift that is required to really do this properly. And speaking from experience, it is incredibly humbling to do this work, even at an organization that might be at the forefront of trying to inspire companies to do it. It is hard. It is difficult by nature. And if it doesn't feel hard, then you're not doing it right. And so thank you for sharing that. Let's move on to that second category, which was around how companies should be looking at their communities that they directly impact. And Pernell, you have an incredible example baked into Black and Bold about what that looks like. Could you share a little bit with us?
Sure thing. So, the idea of Black and Bold, before it was a name, before we really had an industry per se, we had a focus on a stakeholder demographic and one that represented us because we, want that demographic, again, disadvantaged youth. And so being from Gary, Indiana, being a low socioeconomic environment, a low resource household, being a graduate and a career person, my best friend that grew up across the street from me had a very similar path within his household as well. And so the conversations that we had as we continue to evolve as people, being more career focused, but also in a sense of how do we make sure we're not forgetting where we came from, and supporting youth that currently are walking in the shoes that we once walked in. And not everyone that we know very well from our own peer groups that we grew up with, not everyone really gets a chance to understand what the greater world looks like. And so the idea of Black and Bold was a matter of how do we focus on allowing our economics, our personal economics, to play a greater role, but then create a vehicle that allows for other people to be able to participate in that. And so so we do that by way of owning the vertical on specialty coffee, and allowing that, and looking at that industry in I just call it a modernized way, and I'll give a few examples of that, but also allowing everyday consumers to extend their social impact back into their community, whereas they otherwise wouldn't within a commodity category as coffee. And so, with knowing we wanted to support disadvantaged youth up front, we built a 5% for our youth program, which is 5% of our profits we give back to initiatives that support disadvantaged youth across the U.S. I'll tie back into that just a little bit here in a second. But the intention, actually I'll go into that. So the focus was, as we have clients and consumers that purchase from us, we tie back to initiatives that support disadvantaged youth across the U.S. And so we call it local at scale. So if we are servicing the shop in the South while we're based in the Midwest, that shop owner may know of a program within their community that they would love to have our profits contribute to, that they otherwise couldn't because of their tight margins. And so we decided to not take the coffee shop model and build our economics around, not having the overhead, supporting retail and online, which allows us to actually have a sustainable 5% profit model that can scale out across the country, versus going at solving this problem or this gap in a more conventional way that the industry otherwise wouldn't allow the economics to work out up front. And so I can go on more of a tangent, but I'll pause.
You're welcome to. We certainly have the time. I think particularly hearing about the impact that it then does have on the communities. Understanding your model is important, but like what are the actual outputs?
So I think the important piece for us is when we talk about sustainability, it's also from the context of the life cycle of the business, right? And I have to preface that because we're 2 years old. We just had our arrived on the national stage in January of this year with launching at Target across the U.S. And select stores across the U.S. And what that allows us to do is to, one, showcase what domestic social impact looks like in the communities that can be benefited from. Knowing these communities over-index in Black households and low economic households, where when you focus energy on a greater good from a more vulnerable demographic, it has a more profound impact to the Black community. And I think the most important piece that for what we do is how do we strengthen the pipeline of minorities by way of strengthening the entire pipeline while over-indexing in Black youth. And so so many things I could say. The examples that I guess we really bring to life is when we look at Target and our retail partnerships. We by way of that partnership, we were able to make 11 pledge partners, where whether it's in LA from a nonprofit that focuses on conservation efforts and disadvantaged youth, or in Miami with tech training for K through 12, in Houston with providing laptops to youth that otherwise wouldn't have access to technology. So allowing us to have a dynamic model that, at the end of the day, the constant is the 5%, but it's amplified by way of the for-profit partner and their reason for being back to the resources that we are able to pledge back to those youth in the future. And so as we grow, and we're small, right? We're on a small base, and the plan is, of course, to grow bigger, to have a larger pool, more profound direct impact. But today, our roadshow in particular is around the context of domestic impact and supporting the communities of the consumer for-profit businesses. And so most of our clients, of course, are for-profit clients. And it's a matter of how do we build a partnership that our impact goes back to the needs of, let's call it the non-profit sector, and how they support disadvantaged youth as well.
Fabulous. I think one of the things that you're speaking to, that you are obviously pioneering and that we see inherent in the B Corp community as well, is this spirit of partnership. And the idea that we can't go at this alone, and we will certainly go farther when we go together. And on the back of COVID-19 and also, this reckoning with racial injustice, we've seen so many B Corps come together with each other in order to scale that change. And I think this idea of scaled impact is really important that you're talking about. And then also partnering with those beyond that immediate B Corp ecosystem to really drive that change beyond, again, what we even can do as a community alone. And so that spirit of partnership is so important. And that's sort of the next wave of where corporate activity can go, where competitors are even coming together to work towards equity. All right, let's move on to that final category around the role of companies in society. And whether that's sort of in the policy lens or in civic engagement or simply advancing change more broadly. And I think all of you have some wonderful examples to share there. So why don't we start with Katie this time and go from there?
Yeah, I think for us, that has been sort of core to Koya from the beginning, was thinking about what's the purpose, our broader purpose as a company. We are a for-profit business, but we definitely spend a lot of time talking about our lever for change. And for us, we're a recruiting firm. So a traditional recruiting firm gets a rec for a job. They go out, they start interviewing candidates, they find candidates, they pick some, they put them forward to a client. And then they go and do that cycle again. That person gets hired and you go on and on. So we sort of looked at our search methodology and said, well, where are the levers for change in terms of the kind of impact we want to have in the world? And the first thing that we looked at was, okay, there's an opportunity for us to present pools of candidates that look and feel more like the world as it is, as opposed to the way people have been hired traditionally. So we set metrics as a company around, we wanted 50% people of color in our candidate pools. And we were very specific with clients that we were not going to put forward candidate pools where that was not the case. And we talked about why and did some education there. We also found a lever for change in getting search committees, which we work with a lot, boards of directors picking nonprofit leaders, saying this is an opportunity for us to be forward thinking around education. So how can we reduce bias in the hiring process? Having a pool that looks more representative is not the only barrier. So we now have standard part of our search process is training around, very basic anti-bias training as part of our search process. And then also we talk quite a bit about the pieces of our process where we're mitigating for that bias in the selection process. And both of those ways, yes, it's a one-on-one client relationship, so it might not feel like the broader community, but when you multiply that over 1,000 hires over the last 5 years, all leading organizations, it is a multiplier. So that is something we do really as part of our process. We're constantly trying to evolve and say, how can we be a partner to our clients in helping them on their journey around DEI? What can we offer them? We also certainly put out papers and sit on panels and all those more traditional things. But I think for us, it's looking at what's our business product and model, and how can we impact the community we're working within.
Absolutely. And all of those things shift the culture, which is sort of the fabric that we're all living in. So incredibly important work. Geeta, can you tell us a little bit about your impacts in society and even beyond, as we talked about earlier?
Right. I do believe that we have a very leveraged way to impact things, because we are owners of equity. We are investing in stocks of companies from around the world, in the US, internationally, as well as emerging markets. And so we have an ability to both select companies that are leaders in these, along these dimensions, companies that get that their people are their talent and their assets and not just a cost to be minimized and managed. So that's always been our orientation. But in addition, because we have a unique reach to corporate managements as investors, you have kind of a way in which you can be talking to the corner office and like change from the top down, and honestly empower the progressive forces within most companies, because most corporate management needs to lean into what's already available within their firms. So we have taken it up as a big priority of ours. We've always engaged on these issues, but we've upped our asks of companies. So if you can think of it as a theory of change, we are looking for consistent, persistent, tenacious engagement by owners saying, we want this, we care about this. Because for the most part, companies will say, we can't do it. We would do it if shareholders were not so short-term oriented and profit focused. So we're saying, no, we are the shareholders. We're giving you the latitude to do this. In addition, our clout is enhanced by belonging to a group of racial justice investors. So to your point about collaborations and bringing greater impact from combining forces with the larger pool of assets. So again, you amplify your voice and your ask. We've been focused on not only how their top managements and boards look, because one of the things is that there's hiring, but there's not advancement, and you need to lean into that. And then very, very importantly, from our point of view, how the company is in its business, in its role as a creator of value. And so there's a supply chain that every company has control over, just like we do in our own supply chain. And then ultimately where they sit in the value chain. What is their marketing strategy? Do they perpetuate stereotypes? What types of products do they sell? So there's a way in which the same checkup and urging to do better that we've talked about doing at our own firms, we can do for companies as well. And ultimately, maybe because of the place I sit and the field in which I work, I view finance as a big underpinning, and financial inequity as a big underpinning of lack of opportunity and the persistence of inequality without mobility and a lot of the injustice that results from it. So therefore, leaning into those business practices that are either at the center of the prison industrial complex or even deeper issues like that. And we've also had the opportunity to testify in Boston City, for example, about its pension funds and its investment in private prisons and why they should divest. So there's a lot of avenues where standing on something dull and boring like finance, you actually can raise your voice and become a motive force for both creating the vocabulary, creating the metrics, watching out for it, and most excitingly, creating an ecosystem where companies challenge each other to share best practice and create a race to the top. So this is what you've done in a way, B Corp, B Labs for all of us companies by sharing best practice. And that's kind of what we're trying to do as well in our portfolio companies.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Such incredible work and so much influence there, which I think is what every company can realize, is that every stakeholder, client, employee, supply chain connection, like all of those things are places to influence. And I think Geeta in particular, I wouldn't necessarily call finance the boring part of the equation, but as we talk about equity, it's really about shifting power, and so much power rests in that industry. And so great, so grateful for all of the work that you're doing. We're going to turn it to Pernell to talk a little bit about the role that Black and Bold is playing in society. And for the audience, when he's finished, we will go to some questions. And so have a think about what you might want to ask. Click at the very bottom on the section that says Q&A and type in your question there. So Pernell, over to you.
Sure thing. So I think one of the most important roles that we have is representation of being a Black-owned business on a national stage, in particular in packaged goods, in particular in a consumable such as coffee. Coffee isn't new to America. It's the second most consumed beverage after water, and it's been in the U.S. since the 18th century. But yet I stand in front of you all today as the first nationally distributed coffee brand in the U.S. That's a fundamental why and how. We didn't re-innovate coffee, right? It's a matter of allowing everyday consumers to, again, have an economic impact back to their communities. Other than that, it's a matter of why, and it's the pipeline, it's the education gap, it's the understanding of retail and retailer distribution and the disparities within the Black community on how to even play in that arena to become national, to execute, live, operate, build a business beyond just your own community. We don't have enough time for statistics in the sense of the economic barriers that someone has to overcome, financial barriers, let alone to start a business, which we all can relate to, but it's a matter of how far of a gap does someone have to overcome to do so. The day that, for us today, and I would say it's one of the things that I kind of joke around all the time with Black and Bold and saying, all right, well, we were Black before we started this. We're still Black. We didn't start the business or build a business because we're Black, but it's part of the representation that comes with the space that we occupy. Right? We don't deem it as a political statement whatsoever, and we try to ensure that the naming convention embodied the products that we bring to market. Black coffee, Black tea, Bold coffee, Bold tea. However, the weight of that representation is tremendous during the 2020 with not only COVID, but also when we talk about social injustices or abilities of how do we as a society at least acknowledge, whether we're good egg and that there are bad eggs, and how do we unite?
Thanks, Pernell. I think you're done. I hope I'm not cutting you off.
To do something about that. And so there's statistic that Black-owned businesses. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, you just cut off for a little bit, but please keep going.
Can you hear me now? With the pandemic, that over 40% of Black-owned businesses will not turn their lights on again, right? And that should be damning for everybody, in the sense of those that may be meeting this conversation from different vantage points and from less statistics or less awareness. It feels polarizing to hear someone represent or speak on supporting Black-owned businesses, so on and so forth. But the statistics in themselves tell a story that is very polarizing and scary for America as a whole, because the Black population is almost 15% of America. And so to have that much vulnerability within one demographic should be alarming for all of us. And I think while we have, Anthea, you mentioned it, the urgency of now to do something, we all have to think about what expectations do we have from the conventional ways that we've shopped, we've consumed, we've purchased, and build greater expectations, not only for ourselves and how we become more inclusive, but also from the retailers that we shop with, and also the brands that we purchase from. So I think it's just extremely important for not only Black and Bold from a representation standpoint to be an example of what is possible for Black-owned businesses at a national stage, but we also have a role to help our retail partners better engage and connect with Black-owned businesses, but also to help retailers understand the ask and the expectations that consumers have with retailers better representing and diversifying access to Black-owned businesses as well.
Wonderful.
Sorry about the bandwidth issues.
No worries. I caught most of it. I hope everyone listening in did as well. We're going to turn to some questions now. And I'm going to do my best to navigate the Q&A tab.
And I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to
yes,
help you
if you'd like to support, I would certainly appreciate that. I think I could start off with one question. There's quite a few questions on what it means to be B Corp certified, and in particular, you know, what was most interesting about certifying? What was the biggest challenge, and how fundamentally have you changed as a result? And so I would love to direct that to Geeta and Purnell to answer that amalgamation of 3 or 4 questions together.
Absolutely. I think you kind of come to the table thinking you're pretty cool and doing a lot that's already ahead of the curve, but then when someone from the outside audits and takes a look at you, and with the knowledge that they bring of the whole domain and other players and what else could be possible, it's really a fabulous learning journey for us. When we first got certified, we realized that we were really head and shoulders above on the environmental side. We had been tracking our own carbon footprint and offsetting it since 2005 or something like this. And so, but on the S side, the people side of things, the managerial aspects of running a firm and its people, we learned a lot. And so to me, the continuing journey of learning has been, you know, what I think of still as the race to the top from our side, right? How can we be more innovative and creative and share those and learn from others who've done other such things in their own space. And it's very rewarding to get back a grade and maybe be called. I think it builds, renews and strengthens our commitment to these issues, to be externally validated like that.
Yeah, I agree with Geeta, especially how she opened it with you believe you're doing some innovative stuff, but then when you when it's a formalized process to better understand how you not per se rank, but how you score against what's possible. It's humbling, but it's also encouraging because in pursuing B Corp certification, you have to know that there's always something better, and to be able to identify and benchmark where you are, but to be challenged to think further on a topic that may be on your radar or something that's just completely not on your radar. I personally believe it strengthened our thought leadership for our organization and how we strategically plan the impact that we do have, not just from where maybe our strength, but also areas that's important to other people in our ecosystem. So I think the most interesting piece is how much you learn coming out of it than what you went into it with where you were as a business.
And thank you both of you for that. And Thea, there's a question here around, do you think B Corps have improved and advanced over the years, and if so, how? And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how the B Impact Assessment, which is the vehicle that you use, is updated every 3 years or so, 2 or 3 years, and in particular, perhaps how the B Impact Assessment has changed with regard to racial equity over the years.
Yep. So in order to become a B Corp, just to set a baseline, a company has to take the B Impact Assessment, which is we consider it a public good. Any individual, any company, anyone on the planet can go and actually explore and look at the B Impact Assessment, because we do see the power in it as a learning tool, in addition to being a business management tool. So the company has to meet a certain bar on that impact assessment. And then it also has to do 2 other things, which is change its corporate governance so that the leaders of that company are legally required to act in the interest of their stakeholders. And they also have to commit to public transparency. And so those are the 3 sort of key ingredients of what it means to be a B Corp. The meat of it is in the B Impact Assessment, which essentially assesses a company across its performance on 5 different stakeholders. And so how well are you performing in the interest of your workers, in the interest of your community, in the interest of your consumers, your supply chain, and also the environment. It is the type of assessment that encourages better actions rather than punishing companies for places where they might not be working. And so it encourages continual improvement over time, but you do have to meet a baseline of an 80 points out of roughly 200-ish points. The assessment itself was born in 2006 with an inaugural group of, it was something around 20 companies that were our first B Corps. And every 3 years, as Fiona says, it goes through an update. We are currently on version 7, I want to say. I always mess it up. It's version 6 or version 7. And for each of the version updates, the assessment itself goes through a rigorous update where an independent body called our Standards Advisory Council reviews and updates and questions and interrogates to just further increase the integrity of the assessment itself. One of the panelists mentioned earlier that a company's behavior can't exist outside of the context of the world that we live in. And so for all of the events that have happened since 2006, there have been impacts and improvements to that standard based on what it means to be good. It is not a static benchmark. It is continually moving and it's continually advancing so that companies are encouraged to be better actors in the world. And in the wake of this year's events, I think this might have been another question. We've seen unprecedented interest in the B impact assessment. I think more companies than ever are interested in really understanding what it means to have impact, that they have to go beyond marketing messages or a CSR report and really bake it into the DNA of a company. And I think we've also learned in the sort of reckoning with racial injustice that our assessment does a good job, it does not do a great job. And so we are currently undergoing an assessment of the tool purely through a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, with experts coming in to help us ensure that the next iteration, which should come out in a year or two, does build in that level of standard. And so as a baseline, what it would now mean to be a B Corp also includes racial equity in a way that it never has before. And so it's a living and breathing thing, just like a company and just like our world is a living and breathing thing, and it continually evolves and improves over time.
That's great. Thank you, Anthea. And I think that speaks to another question that was posted by someone, which said, how do you assure that companies that are B Corp certified are truly working for justice? This person was referencing something they'd read recently about how some companies, purport to be supporting justice in their advertisements, in their marketing, but on the other hand, are sort of doing practices that aren't in support of equity, right? And so,
I mean, I can build on that by saying part of what particularly that legal infrastructure that has to be built in to a company in order to become a B Corp, that legal infrastructure enables any stakeholder that is impacted by a company to hold that company accountable. And so by no means do we say that every B Corp in the world is perfect. They will make mistakes. And they acknowledge they will make mistakes, but their stakeholders then hold them to account. And we've seen numerous of these sort of events, particularly in 2020, where employees can see practices that are not in line with what they believe to be a B Corp is. And then those companies are not only required, but are incentivized to make those changes because they are held accountable to those various stakeholders. And so it's this sort of beautiful cycle of accountability that once a company commits, then it commits to being good, knowing it will fail, and can continually move forward.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Another question, and maybe we can pose this to all three panelists. The question is, has your success as a socially responsible company affected your competitors and your suppliers to change their business models? I think it kind of goes to sort of part 3 of Anthea's 3x3 model, but would love just to hear a little bit more on that, about how your actions and your models are perhaps changing your industry as a whole.
Two quick thoughts on that. we started on the path of being a sustainably oriented investor many years ago. 2003 is when we started this firm, and we were at the time foolish enough to think we were going to change all of finance to be similarly sustainably aligned. And many thought it was kind of, wild and woolly, foolish ambition. But I'm fingers crossed, but I do believe we are at a tipping point, and that we are in fact reaching the point where such questions don't seem out of place in discussions with companies. And it's part of the theory of change that we cease to measure companies on only one dimension and instead expect many more variables. I always used to say, I'm an Indian woman. I always got asked, do you know how to dress well, but also do you know how to cook well? Do you know how to sing well, et cetera, et cetera. So, why can't you? You can do more than one thing at the same time. And it's a reaffirming that means matter. And that to me, the comment is such an exciting avenue to change our competitors, and our supply chain is affected because they know that we will ask these questions. And so they come prepared a little bit more on that. So I believe we have been a force for change in that direction as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Geeta, there was another question that was actually directed explicitly at you, which is really about, why aren't other mainstream financial institutions becoming certified B Corps? I don't know if you could just speak to that briefly.
Yeah, it's my hope that they're on the journey and that they will indeed see the light. They're already signatories to something called the UNPRI, United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing. And many of the requirements there are primarily to do with how you do what you do instead of how you run your firm or how you manage for your other stakeholders. So, however, seeing business opportunity or a variety of reasons, I'm not here to second guess their motivations. Many of them have stepped up to the plate to be assessed and certified and submit themselves to an annual ranking by another group on this dimension. So I'm hoping that it's a matter of time before not only what they make, but also how they manage their firm and how they do what they do becomes important to showcase. Market forces are helping. I think millennials and women investors are demanding more, and authenticity and consistency are important. So you can't just make a product one day and continue with the rest of your business as if it didn't matter. So it's my hope that this type of transparency and accountability, and indeed monitoring by groups like B Corp, B Labs will raise this this bar for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And Thea, is there one of the questions you'd like to direct to the panelists or yourself? Got a lot of questions here to choose from.
I guess I also want to add that we are very secure in the knowledge that business is a group of very competitive people. And so setting something that they can compete against themselves in the past or others, their peers, this might harness a force that will be a wind at our back.
And Thea, I'm seeing a question here, which is perhaps sort of builds off Geeta's points. Does it take longer for bigger corporations to become B Corp certified versus a smaller business?
I suppose the short answer to that is yes. The assessment component of becoming a B Corp on the B Impact assessment is incredibly rigorous, which I'm sure Geeta and Purnell can attest to. And so the larger the scope of your operations, the longer it will take to go through that assessment. And in particular, we are one of very few certifications that actually verifies answers. And so it's not just a self-assessment. We then have a team that goes in and verifies the responses that are made. And so yes, it certainly takes longer. I think we've also been developing pathways for large companies to become better engaged with the B Corp community. There's a whole slew, there's an industry of consultants that has emerged to help those larger companies get on the pathway. And at the moment, we have one of the largest multinationals in the world, Danone, globally, which is committed to becoming a B Corp by 2025, in just 5 short years. About 30% of their businesses have already been certified. And so Danone North America is actually, I believe, the largest B Corp, at least in our region. And then we have lots of other multinationals who are taking different approaches. So for example, Unilever has about 6 subsidiary brands that are B Corps. And so they're just taking a slightly different approach. So the short answer is yes, and it's about the investment in time and also the rigor that goes into it. And so it's somewhat dependent on size and also somewhat dependent on the complexity of the business as well.
That's great. There's a sort of general question I think anyone can answer. What is the biggest obstacle facing B Corps from becoming commonplace in the corporate world? Is it political, cultural, economic? Is there another definition? Oh, sorry. Is there even? Well, I'm not quite sure what that means. But is there some other kind of obstacle in the way of B Corp's momentum?
I'd love to hear from the B Corps why they might think of any obstacles. We certainly see them from a growth standpoint. How do we, recruit more of these incredible companies to join us? And I would say at the moment, we are overrun with demand. And so I think part of it is the cultural impact, if I were to hazard a guess. And we are certainly at the tipping point of that. I think the Business Roundtable's announcement last fall, which is the Business Roundtable is 181 of the largest corporations based in the United States. They made a declaration that the purpose of a corporation is to deliver value to stakeholders, which is obviously an ethos we've been living by since 2006, and away from an ethos that had driven the business and private sector, and still does to a certain extent, for over 50 years, that the purpose of business was to drive profitability, and in particular for shareholders. That was a tipping point to start the conversation. Things like stakeholder capitalism are now part of a regular vernacular in the business press. We're starting to hear more about shareholder primacy as a failure of our economic system and starting to move away from that. And so culturally, this idea that we have to redefine what success in business looks like is happening. And the silver lining of a crisis is that you can see that laid bare right in front of you. And I think most people, particularly I can speak to the US, are feeling that impact of business using extractive ways to drive their profitability. And so the cultural shift is here and it's happening. We now have to really drive behavioral shifts inside of companies. I think people are mostly on board. One of the biggest challenges is business leaders often don't know how to get started. And so if you are one of those people who is hearing a business leader talk about it, send them our way. We can certainly help them start the journey. And then the other piece is policy. And so while we have worked since 2006 on legal infrastructure that helps a company bake in accountability to stakeholders, there's still law that requires businesses to prioritize profitability first. And so we're actually launching a policy paper this month, or actually in September. Time's getting away from me. We just launched the paper, which is a policy position geared towards policymakers to encourage them to enact federal law that would demand companies act in the interest of stakeholders and drive something that we call benefit governance at a mandated level and not at the opt-in level that we currently subscribe to as the B Corp community.
Geeta or Panel or Katie, do any of you want to jump in and build on Anthea's comments?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think the important piece for B Corp and an organization looking to become B Corp or a newly founded business that, whether they're B Corp pending, meaning they're less than a year old, and so they don't have enough runway to be audited yet, or officially B Corp, is, how is one sustainability of one of the ethos that B Corp, the assessment embodies. So again, whether it's environmental, whether it's, employee, whether it's whatever the stakeholder base is. And as you're looking towards the future for your business, strategically, how are you going to compete outside of just capital and profit? How do you engage your community of stakeholders and let's call it the health of that community ultimately should correlate to the health of your business over time. And if you don't have that formally aligned, then how do you intentionally sustain your business, right? And we see the evolution of so many sectors and how technology plays a role in who's winning and who's losing pretty quickly. And you have to think about either you're going to be a part of that cycle or you're going to have something even more sustainable, and ideally multiple pillars that are sustainable to evolve with your stakeholder demographic. I think the huge benefit of the B Corp certification is it pressure tests you across multiple fields, not just one. And so you can be able to evolve as, your core today may evolve to not be your core. It may be a different area, and having a full lens on that allows you to stay viable.
There's a very practical question here, which I think is really great, and I'd love, maybe it's probably our last question, and apologies to all the questions we didn't quite get to. But there's a question here about, are there associations of Black-owned businesses that are listed so that white allies can support the businesses, and how companies can diversify their supply chain? Love to hear from any of you who could maybe speak to that.
There's Pernell here. There's quite a few. I would say it's been a very fragmented approach to building directories. And so one thing from a directory standpoint is how tech savvy are these Black-owned businesses? So always think local, start local for sure, because some people are so busy with running their business and trying to keep it viable that they may not be a part of these different lists per se. But Official Black Wall Street is a highly credible directory across different industries and different sectors. And then from a supplier diversity standpoint, which is, let's call it a career field and a resource field in itself for, large organizations. Let's call it certifying body for minority-owned businesses is, it's a very long acronym. It's NMSDC, National Minority Supplier Diversity Council. And MBE is a minority business enterprise, is the formal certification that you receive to vet out that you are, of the ethnic background per se that you say you are. And so that, I think the integrity of that is if you are an organization looking to have or supplier diversity or know someone in supplier diversity who always are looking to strengthen their pipeline, in particular for Black-owned businesses, that would be the MBE would be the certification that you would want to see from a short list of people that are, let's call it certified and more than likely ready to do business to immediately help diversify and strengthen your supply chain.
Thank you, Pernell. That's super helpful. So we are rapidly running out of time. So I think I'm just going to turn it back to you, Anthea, to see if there's any closing comments you would like to make or offer, and maybe invite our panelists to maybe share a closing thought or two as well.
Yes, I wanted to thank the panelists for sharing all of their insights today, and to you, Fiona, and team for hosting this. And had one last question for the panelists, which is about, for those listening and for those interested in being part of this, group of business leaders who are advancing equity and justice, like what's one parting piece of advice that you might have for them and what they can do?
I think I'd say two things that I've already said, but I'll reiterate it. really focus on centering that strategy as part of your business efforts, right? It's part of your strategic plan to build a business with purpose and to build an inclusive, equitable organization. I think centering it will really help. And then that just stay humble, because part of doing this and part of being a B Corp is being really transparent about how you're running your business and where you're messing up. So be ready to sort of stay humble and be ready to stay transparent, because the more we do that, the more we learn from each other, and businesses will get better because of that learning.
I would also say, the assessment is accessible, and small bites. Jump in, pick a section, answer the questions, see how you score. But more specifically, I guarantee you're going to learn more by way of answering the questions about your organization and your strategic thought. And it's going to feel like an exercise of strengthening your own entrepreneurship or leadership for your business. So if you ever want to work out, a mental workout, I definitely encourage you guys, just jump in and, again, small bites to go through the assessment.
Yeah, I want to echo some of the thoughts that Katie and Pernell raised, which is that your work is never done. You're in a mode of constant improvement, and if you're not reaching the targets that you set out, maybe there are some unorthodox things to try and to intentionally try to keep. So a lot of firms will hire people and then not really support them to succeed, and you really have to keep thinking, how can you continue to do that? Just to use one example. So it's a process of continuous improvement, and then to never lose an opportunity to publicly reiterate its importance with your team, because they need to be clear that it's front and center and very important to what you are assessing as a business leader in them, and giving it a legitimacy, but also a high prominence in your view. So I was saying, having multiple metrics, you need to reiterate that this is one of the metrics that you care about. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I want to say a really big thank you to our moderator, Anthea Kelsick, and to you and all of your colleagues at B-Lab, including the founders of B-Lab, for all of the work that you're doing to really make sure that business can be a force for good, including in this aspect of creating more racial and other kinds of equity. And thank you to our wonderful panelists, Katie and Geeta and Pernell. It's been such a pleasure to have you on this call today, and we love all of your companies and hope to stay in touch with you in the future. Just wanted to say a couple of things in closing. As Anthea mentioned in the beginning, we're living through multiple crises, including a global reckoning with racial injustice. And I think events like this are important because they help remind us of just how interconnected our world is and the need to find solutions that build a stronger future for all of us. So particularly for the students who are on this webinar today, I want to really encourage you to think about this week about the power of your own agency, how you can be individual change makers, and collectively how, when we all do that, we do it as a society. How can we focus on the change that we want to see in the world and we know the world needs? The world is clearly at a critical juncture, and one thing is clear: we need to work together. We know that we're at a moment of when profound change is possible. We know we need to work together. We need to get the future right. We definitely need governments to step up and take action. Universities, we have a big role to play too, nonprofits and NGOs. But I think what we've really focused on today is about the role of the corporate sector in really addressing racial injustice and systemic racism. Companies like those that you've met today, and the nonprofit B-Lab, which is helping power this movement of certified B Corps, is really vital. And so we encourage you to vote with your feet and with your wallets, buy from, invest in, and go and look for jobs at companies like these, companies that really are putting DEI at the center of all they do. At UNH, we recognize that we need effective change makers now in the world more than ever. And we're committed to graduating thousands of students, young leaders who have the competence gained through real world experience in these kinds of issues that will ultimately create change for the good of all. So again, thank you all for being part of this webinar today. We've had about 400 people be part of this. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but encourage you to learn more about B Corps. And Kathy, if you could just put that slide up at the end, that would be really great. There is a wonderful resource on the B Lab website, which is a compilation of anti-racism resources. Encourage you to check that out. And we hope that you will tune in again later this fall for the second of our Changemaker speaker series. But again, huge thanks to Anthea, to Katie, Geeta, and Panel for your time today and for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with us. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.